He never saw it coming. One minute Alex and Jamie were laughing together on a quiet hiking trail, the next Jamie was dead, stabbed in the chest, left to bleed out alone in the woods. Alex, covered in his best friend's blood, had no idea what had happened. And the police, well, they were quick to convict him. But was Alex really the killer? Or had he been wrongfully blamed for a crime he didn't commit? Alex Williams had always been the quieter one, content to keep to himself. Life had recently handed him a harsh blow. He had just ended a long-term relationship, and the heartbreak had left him reeling. He needed time away, a place to find some peace. His best friend, Jamie Henderson, knew exactly what Alex needed. The two had grown up together, their bond forged over years of shared secrets, laughter, and support. Jamie was the kind of person who always knew how to lift Alex's spirits, even when he felt lost. "You need to get away, man. Somewhere quiet." "I'll go with you," Jamie had said, her usual charm and infectious grin making it impossible for Alex to decline. The Appalachian Mountains seemed like the perfect choice, remote, beautiful, and full of the kind of tranquility Alex craved. The idea of a hiking trip was simple enough. A break from the noise of the world, just two friends surrounded by the sounds of nature. They packed their gear and set off, unaware that the wilderness would soon become the setting for a nightmare neither could have imagined. The trail they chose was secluded, winding its way through dense trees and towering hills. The kind of place where it would be easy to lose yourself in the landscape. The air was crisp and the leaves crunched underfoot, the sound adding to the serenity of the moment. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. It should have been perfect. But as the hours passed, something started to shift. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the silence felt. The birds seemed to stop singing, the wind died down, and every step they took echoed in the stillness. Alex, ever the introspective one, had been quiet for most of the hike, his mind occupied by thoughts of his failed relationship. Jamie, on the other hand, had been talking non-stop, trying to keep the mood light. "I swear if we keep going up this hill, we'll have a better view than the top of the Empire State Building," Jamie had joked, trying to lighten the mood. But something didn't sit right with Alex. His instincts, the ones that had always told him when something was off, were kicking in. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt as though they were being watched. The trees seemed too thick, the shadows too deep. But he brushed it off, attributing it to the isolation of the mountains. "I think we should head back," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was an edge of unease to it. Jamie, ever the adventurer, scoffed at the idea. "Come on, don't be a buzzkill. We've got all day. Let's go a little further. It'll be worth it." They pressed on. Then they heard it. A rustling sound like someone, or something, was moving through the trees. Alex froze, his senses on high alert. Jamie laughed it off, thinking it was just an animal, maybe a deer. "Relax, man. It's nothing." But as they continued, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had been walking for hours, the trail now feeling narrower, more suffocating. The light was beginning to fade, and they hadn't even reached the halfway point of their planned hike. The woods were closing in on them, and Alex's unease grew. "What if we turn back now?" Alex asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Jamie stopped, her eyes narrowing. "Seriously? What's got into you? Look, we're fine. It's just you and me out here. Nothing's gonna happen." It was the last thing she said before everything went wrong. The chilling feeling Alex had been carrying grew stronger, but he had no idea that the danger was closer than either of them realized. The presence of someone, or something, was no longer a faint suspicion. It was real. The brush of a twig snapping underfoot, the unsettling silence that enveloped them, and the glint of metal that caught Alex's eye, just as he turned to look at Jamie. A fleeting moment, one that would change everything. What was that sound? Was it an animal or something else? Jamie was the first to notice. "Alex, look behind you." Before Alex could turn, something sharp struck him hard in the back, throwing him to the ground. The pain was immediate, excruciating. His vision blurred, his breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to make sense of what was happening. It all happened so fast, too fast. There was no time to react, no time to scream. Jamie's voice, raw with terror, cut through the air as the attacker lunged at her from the shadows. The glint of a blade flashed in the dimming light, and Jamie's scream echoed through the trees as the knife found its mark, striking her repeatedly with brutal force. Alex, stunned by the sudden violence, struggled to make sense of what was happening. His instincts kicked in, he tried to reach for something, anything to fight back. But his limbs were heavy, sluggish, his body not responding fast enough. The pain of a sudden strike to his chest knocked the air from his lungs, and in that instant, everything went dark. Blood poured from his wounds, soaking into the ground beneath him as the world around him spun out of control. In the final moments before unconsciousness claimed him, Alex could only hear the sickening sound of Jamie's desperate gasps for breath, followed by the chilling silence that followed. Then nothing. When Alex finally came to, everything felt distant and fragmented. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and his body ached with pain. His eyes fluttered open to a sterile hospital room, bright lights blurring the edges of his vision. Confusion clouded his mind, and for a moment he couldn't remember how he got there. The sound of a heart monitor steady in the background seemed like an echo from another world. But then the memories came rushing back: Jamie, the attack, the blood. His mind raced, but before he could process anything, a voice, cold and unforgiving, broke through his thoughts. "Alex Williams, you're under arrest for the murder of Jamie Henderson." The words hit him like a physical blow. Murder? He couldn't comprehend it. How could he have killed Jamie? He hadn't even touched the knife. He remembered the struggle, the fight to survive. But the knife, the murder weapon, his fingerprints were on it. That was impossible. A detective stood by his bedside, eyes hard as stone. "We found your prints on the knife, Mr. Williams. Your friend is dead and all the evidence points to you." Alex felt his heart sink, his throat dry as he tried to explain. "I didn't kill her. I swear, I never touched that knife. I was just trying to save her." His voice was hoarse, filled with desperation. But the detective only shook his head as if he had already made up his mind. The room spun again. He had no recollection of touching the knife, let alone using it. But the police had already built their case, one in which he was the killer. And the evidence seemed damning. Alex's blood, splattered on the weapon, could have been explained by the struggle. But his fingerprints? That was a different story altogether. The days following the attack blurred together. Alex was questioned relentlessly, every detail of his story scrutinized. But no matter what he said, the facts were clear. Jamie was dead and Alex was the prime suspect. The police had a theory. They believed that Alex, in a moment of rage or jealousy, had murdered his friend during their hike. But Alex couldn't even begin to fathom that possibility. Jamie was his best friend. Why would he ever hurt her? Then came the breakthrough, a chilling moment that would turn the investigation on its head. A new witness came forward, someone who had been walking along a nearby trail the day of the attack. They claimed to have seen a figure leaving the scene, a shadowy figure with a distinct limp. Could it have been someone else? Alex thought to himself, the possibility gnawing at him. But who? The police seemed uninterested in the new lead. They had already convicted him in their minds, and they weren't about to let a witness shake that conviction. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was being framed. Was someone out there watching them? Had they been targeted? Was the killer still at large, or had the police already arrested the wrong person? Alex, fighting to stay sane, began to dig deeper into the events leading up to the attack. But every answer only seemed to raise more questions. Was the attacker someone they knew? Alex couldn't help but replay every moment, every interaction, looking for any sign that could explain why this happened. Was it a random act of violence, or was Jamie specifically targeted? Was there something about their friendship, something about Alex, that made him a target? Do you think Alex was set up? Could someone else have planted their fingerprints on the knife? What do you think happened that day in the woods? Let me know your theories in the comments below. In the days following the attack, Alex was still in shock. He had barely survived the brutal assault, his body battered and bloodied, his mind struggling to process what had happened. At first, the police treated him with sympathy, questioning him gently as though he were a victim, because in his mind he was. But as the hours passed and the investigation deepened, things started to shift. The initial interviews had been short and vague, the kind of questions one would expect when dealing with a traumatic situation. But soon the tone changed. Alex's responses became a point of contention. His words didn't always match up. One minute he'd recall a fleeting detail and the next he would forget it. The police, trained to read between the lines, saw something in his statements that caused concern. "You keep saying you didn't touch the knife, Alex," Detective Williams pressed, his voice cold, steady. "But your fingerprints were all over it. How do you explain that?" Alex's eyes widened, his throat dry as he tried to speak. I don't know. I didn't touch it. I swear I didn't." The detective's gaze didn't falter. "But the evidence is clear. You were the last one seen with Jamie, and the knife, the weapon that killed her, has your prints." Alex, still reeling from the trauma, felt the walls close in around him. The doubt in the detective's eyes, the coldness in his tone, made him feel more like a suspect than a survivor. Every word he said seemed to fall flat, every explanation met with skepticism. How could the police believe that he killed Jamie? It didn't make sense. He was terrified, confused, and desperate to prove his innocence. As the investigation continued, the police started to piece together the facts in a way that painted Alex as the prime suspect. Yet, something didn't sit right with Detective Martinez, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for patterns. He had seen this before, too many times. The attack on Jamie had the same hallmarks as a series of brutal assaults that had taken place in the surrounding counties over the past few months. The locations were eerily similar, remote, secluded areas where the killer could strike without being seen. The victims, though not all killed, had been left for dead. The signs were unmistakable: a brutal attack followed by the killer disappearing into the night. Martinez couldn't ignore it. Could it be that Alex wasn't the killer? Could someone else be responsible for the deaths, and had they framed Alex in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks? "Look at this," Martinez muttered to his partner, flipping through the case files. "The same MO, the same pattern. There's something bigger at play here." His words were a brief glimmer of hope for Alex, but it wasn't enough to convince the rest of the department. They had already made their decision. Alex was guilty and no new evidence seemed to matter. The pressure was mounting on Alex. After days of interrogation, the police finally made their move. They arrested him for Jamie's murder. The evidence against him seemed airtight. His fingerprints on the knife, his blood at the scene, and the conflicting statements he had made. There was no escaping it. He was going to be charged with murder. Alex was devastated. His whole world had turned upside down in an instant. The justice system, the very system he had believed in, had turned on him. As a young black man with a history of minor offenses, none of which had ever been violent, he knew that the odds were stacked against him. Would anyone believe his side of the story? Or was this it? Was he going to spend the rest of his life behind bars for something he didn't do? In a cold, emotionless courtroom, the weight of the charges bore down on him. The courtroom was full of strangers, his future decided by people who had never known him. His lawyer was doing their best, but with the evidence stacked against him, it was a losing battle. The prosecution painted Alex as a cold-blooded killer, someone who snapped in a fit of rage and murdered his best friend. The jury listened, their faces impassive, while Alex's heart pounded in his chest. "I didn't do it. I swear to you I didn't do it," he whispered to his attorney, his voice barely audible. But his words were drowned out by the overwhelming noise of the case against him. And in that moment, as he stood there, hands shackled and head bowed, Alex felt more alone than he ever had in his life. As the days turned into weeks, Alex's situation grew even more dire. In his cell, he replayed every moment of that fateful day over and over, searching for anything that could explain what had happened. Could he have blacked out? Could he have done something in a fit of rage without realizing it? He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept that he had murdered Jamie. In the silence of his cell, Alex had no one to turn to, no one except the few letters he sent to family, friends, and even journalists. It was his only hope. Someone, anyone, would believe that he was innocent. But with each passing day, that hope seemed to fade further away. Do you believe Alex's claims of innocence? Could the police have overlooked the real killer? Do you think there's a deeper conspiracy at play here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Once the handcuffs were snapped onto Alex's wrists, it felt like the world had come crashing down around him. The weight of his wrongful conviction, the loss of his best friend, and the suffocating reality of his life behind bars was too much to bear. The moment he was thrown into the overcrowded prison, he was met with a mix of cold stares and quiet whispers. To the other inmates, Alex was nothing more than a murderer, someone who had brutally killed his best friend. The hostile looks came from every direction. He had been labeled as the killer from the moment he entered, and that label made it impossible to find any allies. Even those who might have had the compassion to help were too afraid to step forward. After all, how could anyone stand up for a man accused of murder? The guards, too, treated him like a dangerous animal, enforcing rules with little regard for his well-being. One night, as Alex sat on his bunk, the distant sound of shouting echoed through the halls. He had grown used to the noise, the chaos of prison life, but it still rattled him. Alone in his small cell, he felt the crushing weight of isolation. There were no letters from family, no visits from friends. Everyone, it seemed, had turned their backs on him. Even his own mind, overwhelmed by doubt and confusion, seemed to be betraying him. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was trapped, that the life he once knew was slipping further and further away. Yet, amidst the silence and the bleakness of his new reality, there was something inside Alex that refused to die. It was a flicker of hope, faint but still burning. He couldn't let go of the truth. He didn't kill Jamie. He hadn't. But no one believed him. No one except himself. And as the days turned into weeks, then months, he found himself consumed by the need to prove his innocence. Late at night, when the prison was quiet and the guards were making their rounds, Alex would sit on the edge of his cot, his pen scratching desperately across paper. He wrote to anyone who would listen: lawyers, journalists, even private investigators. Each letter was a plea for help. Each sentence was a desperate attempt to find someone who could help him unravel the mystery of Jamie's murder and clear his name. He pored over his case files, rereading the police reports, searching for something, anything, that could explain what had happened. The inconsistencies, the missed details, the unexplained evidence. Alex was convinced that there was a hidden truth, a truth that the police had either ignored or failed to uncover. But what was it? Could it be that someone else had framed him? Could the real killer still be out there walking free? One letter, sent to a small newspaper, was returned. Alex's heart sank when he saw the envelope. It was a rejection. They weren't interested in his case. The agony of being ignored felt like another betrayal. Yet Alex refused to let that stop him. He had nothing but time, and he would not give up. As weeks turned into months, Alex's desperation turned into resolve. He would find a way out of this. The evidence may have seemed damning, but the truth was still out there, and he was determined to uncover it. His letters, though largely ignored, had a ripple effect. One day, a reporter named Vanessa Daniels took an interest in Alex's case. A former crime journalist who had recently retired, she had been looking for something meaningful to pursue. After reading Alex's story, she reached out to him. "I've seen enough wrongful convictions to know when something doesn't add up," Vanessa wrote in her first letter. "I'm going to take a closer look at this case." It was the first real sign of hope Alex had in months. But it was also a new beginning, the kind of beginning that would lead them down a path of discovery, deception, and, ultimately, the pursuit of justice. Vanessa began reviewing the evidence and the police reports, and she quickly identified several inconsistencies in the case. One of the first things that stood out to her was the timeline. Alex's statements, which the police had labeled as inconsistent, had actually been heavily influenced by his trauma. But if she compared the physical evidence with his narrative, things didn't add up. "Alex," she wrote in her next letter, "there's more to this story than the police have told us. Something about the attack doesn't fit. I need to know more about your relationship with Jamie. Was there anyone who could have wanted to hurt him?" Alex had been too afraid to even consider the possibility that someone else might have wanted to hurt Jamie. But now, with Vanessa's help, he started thinking back to the times when Jamie had seemed off. There were moments, fleeting ones, when Alex had noticed something odd about Jamie's behavior, a look he had never quite understood. Was there anyone else who might have had a reason to harm Jamie? Vanessa pressed in her letter. Anyone who had a history with him? A secret affair, maybe? A jealousy that had been building up? The questions were uncomfortable, but Alex knew it was time to confront them. He had never once considered the possibility that Jamie might have been involved in something dangerous, something that could have led to his death. But the more he thought about it, the more things began to make sense. What do you think? Was there something more to Jamie's life that Alex didn't know? Could someone close to them have played a part in Jamie's murder? And what do you think of the clues Alex and Vanessa have uncovered so far? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Vanessa had spent months combing through old files, re-interviewing witnesses, and connecting dots that the authorities had missed. And one day her persistence paid off in a way no one could have expected. It was a man named Derek, a local hiker who had been near the scene of the crime the day Jamie was murdered. He had been walking the same trail when he saw something that immediately caught his attention. A man, matching the description of the assailant, had been lurking in the shadows near the trail. But the most shocking part? This man wasn't Alex. Derek had seen the killer clearly, and it wasn't the man the police had arrested. "I saw him," Derek insisted when he spoke to Vanessa. "I didn't know who he was at the time, but I saw him running away. The guy looked different. I didn't think much of it then, but when I saw Alex's face on the news, I knew something wasn't right. That wasn't the guy who attacked Jamie. It wasn't Alex." This revelation was nothing short of a bombshell. The police had been convinced that Alex was the killer from the start, and all their evidence seemed to point in his direction. But here was a man, an independent witness, who had seen someone else. Someone who didn't match Alex's description. Vanessa wasted no time. She contacted the authorities and presented Derek's statement, demanding that they reconsider the case. But despite this breakthrough, the police were hesitant to reopen the investigation. They had already made up their minds. Alex was guilty, and no amount of new information seemed to sway them. As Vanessa dug deeper, she began to uncover a more complex picture. Could there have been more than one person involved in the attack? Was Jamie's murder part of a larger scheme, something Alex had never even suspected? Vanessa started to ask questions that no one had thought to ask before. Did Jamie have enemies that Alex didn't know about? Was someone close to him hiding a secret? Alex began to replay everything in his mind. The odd moments, the strange looks, the things Jamie had said. Was there more to their friendship than he had realized? Had Jamie been involved in something dangerous, something that had led to her death? And what about the mysterious man Derek had seen? Could he have been involved in a previous attack, or had he been waiting for the right moment to strike again? The questions piled up, but no answers seemed forthcoming. The more Vanessa uncovered, the more mysterious the case became. Derek's statement was just the beginning. There were more leads, more unexplained details that suggested Alex was far from guilty. But who could have been behind the murder? And why had they chosen to frame Alex? As Alex sat in his prison cell, waiting for a breakthrough, he couldn't help but wonder. Was the truth finally coming to light? Or was there someone still out there, pulling the strings, hiding in the shadows? What do you think? Could the real killer still be out there? What is the motive behind Jamie's death? And who is the mysterious man Derek saw? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Could this be the break Alex has been waiting for, or is it just another dead end? Years had passed since Alex's arrest, and the case that had once seemed like a closed book now appeared to be opening once again, but this time, the pages contained something entirely unexpected. After months of relentless pressure, new evidence finally emerged. Evidence that Alex's legal team had spent years fighting for. The breakthrough came when DNA evidence from the crime scene was re-examined. A key forensic investigator, working independently of the initial police investigation, discovered a crucial error. The DNA on the knife, which had previously been attributed to Alex, didn't match his. It matched a man whose name had never been considered in the original investigation. This man, someone who had been under the radar, had a history of stalking Jamie in the months leading up to her death. The new suspect was identified as Richard Holloway, a former acquaintance of Jamie's. Holloway had been an obsessed admirer, one who had secretly been in love with Jamie for years. He had never been able to accept that she had moved on with Alex, and his jealousy had grown into something far darker. Holloway had watched Jamie from a distance, showing up at places where she would be, following her through the streets, and occasionally sending cryptic, unsettling messages. At first, Jamie had brushed off his advances, but as his obsession deepened, his behavior became more erratic. In the months before her death, Jamie had started to distance herself from him, but Holloway wasn't about to let her go. The turning point came when he discovered that she was getting closer to Alex, someone he saw as an obstacle, someone who had won her heart. It was jealousy, rage, and a twisted sense of possession that led Holloway to plan Jamie's murder. He stalked her one last time, waiting for the perfect opportunity. When Jamie and Alex went hiking together in the mountains, Holloway saw his chance. His attack was brutal and swift, designed to leave Jamie dead and Alex framed for the crime. He planted Alex's fingerprints on the murder weapon, used his blood to make it appear that Alex had been involved, and fled into the shadows, leaving Alex to take the fall. When the police first arrested Alex, Holloway had watched from the sidelines, pleased with how easily the system had been manipulated. He never thought Alex would fight back. He never imagined the case would be reopened, that the truth would eventually come to light. The new DNA evidence, combined with witness statements and further investigation into Holloway's obsession with Jamie, painted a clear picture of what had truly happened. Holloway's arrest was swift. The police had finally caught the real killer, the man who had terrorized Jamie, ruined Alex's life, and caused a ripple effect of pain and confusion that no one could undo. Alex's exoneration was public, and the news spread like wildfire. The truth had come out and Alex was finally a free man. The charges against him were dropped, and he was released from prison after years of suffering. But despite his newfound freedom, Alex didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel like the man who had won his life back. The years spent behind bars, living with the stigma of a murderer, had left deep scars on his soul. The loss of Jamie, the betrayal of the justice system, and the years of being forced to carry the weight of something he didn't do had changed him. Alex's release didn't mean his pain disappeared. The first few days of freedom were surreal. For so long he had imagined what it would be like to walk out of prison, to breathe fresh air again, to speak to people who weren't behind bars. But now that he was out, the world felt cold and unfamiliar. The hardest part wasn't the loss of his freedom, it was the loss of Jamie. He would never be able to have the same kind of life they had planned. There would be no more long hikes, no more late-night conversations, no more laughs. Jamie was gone and nothing could bring her back. Alex still carried the guilt of not being able to save her. But there was something else, the deeper, quieter pain that Alex had to confront. The years of wrongful imprisonment, the constant fear, the betrayal by a system that was supposed to protect him, those wounds would take much longer to heal. How could anyone ever fully recover from such an injustice? Still, as Alex stood on the steps of the courthouse, a free man at last, he knew that the fight wasn't over. He would never stop advocating for others who were wrongfully accused, for those who had been through the same nightmare he had. He would tell his story, help others who had been lost in the system, and perhaps find a way to heal, even if it would take a lifetime. What do you think of Holloway's motives? Could his obsession with Jamie really have driven him to murder? Do you believe Alex will ever fully heal from the years he spent in prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In the aftermath of the tumultuous years he spent behind bars, Alex was finally able to find a semblance of peace. The world outside prison walls seemed foreign, as if time had moved without him. Despite the victory of his exoneration, the scars of his wrongful conviction ran deep, etched into his heart, his soul, and the very fabric of his being. For Alex, freedom felt like both a gift and a curse. It wasn't just the loss of his best friend that haunted him, it was the betrayal of a system he had once trusted. The justice system had failed him, and as much as he longed to put the past behind him, the memories of the years spent in isolation, the injustices he had endured, and the weight of being falsely labeled a murderer were not so easily erased. But there was something within Alex that refused to be broken. He made it his mission to ensure that no one else would have to go through the hell he had endured. Through advocacy, speaking out on behalf of those wrongfully accused, he tried to use his experience to help others who had been trapped by a system that was supposed to protect them. He worked tirelessly with organizations that focused on prison reform, wrongful convictions, and the protection of civil rights. One late afternoon, sitting in a small office filled with legal papers and case files, Alex met with a group of lawyers who specialized in wrongful convictions. His hands trembled slightly as he signed a petition to free an innocent man who had been wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit. His own story had become a driving force for him to help others, to make sure the truth always had a chance to come to light. Could this happen again? Alex wondered aloud one evening, his voice filled with both sorrow and determination. Could someone else be framed for a crime they didn't commit? His mind still lingered on the idea of injustice, on how fragile the system could be. What's the true cost of justice? He asked, reflecting on all the lives disrupted, all the people broken by a false conviction. And it was a question that weighed heavily on him. As much as the truth had set him free, the damage to his life had been irreparable. It made him question everything he once believed about the legal system and the people sworn to uphold it. As he looked at the camera, his face calm but carrying the weight of everything he had been through, Alex's eyes told a story of resilience, of the long road to redemption that he had walked. His story wasn't just about the truth coming to light, it was a story about the lives that could be shattered when that truth is hidden, when justice fails, and when the wrong person is punished. If you want to see more cases like this and learn about the real cost of justice, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Did you think Alex was always innocent? Was there ever a moment where you questioned his guilt or innocence? Let me know your theories in the comments. Would his story be enough to change the system? Only time would tell. But for now, Alex had found something he thought he would never have again: peace.